Jacobo.
You are good. Okay, ignore my phone call. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. We're so glad you're here.
It's so good to see you.
Thank you.
Great. I think we're ready.
Are we ready? Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much. Did we do admit all in the waiting room?
Happening now.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining the Post-Secondary Student Supports for Basic Needs Advisory Group. My name is Amy Magasos, and I'm Assistant Director of Policy and Planning at the Washington Student Achievement Council. And I'm joined by three WASAC colleagues and co-hosts who will introduce themselves. Heather.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Heather Hudson. I'm the Director of Policy and Planning here at the Washington Student Achievement Council.
And Savannah.
Hi, my name is Savannah Navarro-Cressy. I am a Policy Associate with the Washington Student Achievement Council.
And Gray.
Gray Sterling, Assistant Director of Policy and Planning, also with the Council.
So today I'm thrilled to recognize you, over 100 leaders from across Washington who are participating, representing 2- and 4-year colleges and universities, school districts, community-based organizations, and public agencies. We're grateful for the leadership that each of you is providing in your communities, with special recognition to the student leaders who are joining us today to share their critical perspective. So we appreciate your participation. And if you haven't yet, please add your name and affiliation or organization in the chat box. Before I dive into more specifics on the agenda today, and in recognition of this week's Indigenous Peoples Day, I want to pause to acknowledge Washington lands as the traditional home of Chinookan, Coast Salish, and Plateau peoples, and to honor the strength of the unique histories, cultures, self-determination, and sovereign tribal governments across the state. We invite you to acknowledge the land and the Indian tribes and nations of where you're joining us from today as we work together to better support students' basic needs. Next slide, please. So I'd like to provide a little background for our meeting today. The Student Supports for Basic Needs Advisory is a statewide group of community-based and higher education leaders concerned with improving supports for post-secondary students' basic needs through identifying barriers to access, spotlighting effective partnerships and policies, and networking across sectors. WASAC convenes this advisory group because your on-the-ground perspectives and expertise really can guide a state vision and agenda for improving post-secondary students' access to basic needs. Some of you joined us a year ago for our first convening of this group, where we identified the priority basic needs areas of food security, housing security, childcare access, and mental behavioral health care. And we spotlighted 2 strong regional partnerships for basic needs. In December, several of you participated in food and housing security presentations at WASAC's Pave the Way State Conference. And while we had to cancel our spring advisory group meeting due to the pandemic, we've really seen strong momentum and engagement across the state in addressing post-secondary basic needs, including huge participation in statewide learning community webinars. So today, we're coming together from different communities, different perspectives, to consider Washington's challenges, our strengths, and priorities going forward in supporting post-secondary basic needs. Our objective today is it's to engage you, cross-sector leaders and policymakers, in considering where we are now and where we need to go as the state in addressing unmet basic needs for students. Needless to say, this is particularly critical with the current crises we're facing in our state and nation. So in our agenda this morning, we'll ground our conversation in why post-secondary basic needs are critical for Washington on several fronts, and consider some recent progress. We'll follow that by a conversation with policymakers who have led in addressing basic needs in post-secondary education. And in the second half of our meeting, we're going to break into discussion groups for deeper consideration of basic needs issues and priorities. And then to wrap up, we'll return to the full group to share and consider our next steps going forward as a state. So finally, let me take a quick moment for housekeeping in this remote environment. First, please participate in the chat throughout the meeting. We expect to have time for a few questions for the panel, and we'll do that through the chat. Video is appreciated if you're able to do that, but please keep your sound on mute until our discussion groups. And we will be recording this meeting this morning. Finally, we'll have 2 break opportunities throughout the meeting. So I'm going to pass the ball now to my colleague, Heather Hudson. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Amy. Before we get into an engagement with you all and the panel, I just wanted to offer, for those of you that are not familiar with the Washington Student Achievement Council, a quick snapshot of who we are and why we're convening this. We are a state agency. We lead strategic planning to improve educational coordination and transitions. That includes policy and research. We administer the state financial aid program, Washington College Grant, and other programs, as well as Get Ahead and college savings plans. And then we also offer some programs that help increase college access and readiness, specifically thinking about FAFSA completion, like our 12th year campaign. Next slide. We also have a 9-member council, and some of the council members are sector leaders from our higher ed institutions, our K-12, and we also have governor-appointed citizen members of our council, and our executive director, Mike Miati. Next slide. This slide is just a summary to demonstrate the strategic framework that the council has adopted in thinking about how do we increase post-secondary attainment for Washington students. You'll see that equity is at the center of all of our work, whether we're focused on increasing affordability, increasing enrollment, ensuring persistence and completion, or addressing what we'll be talking about today, basic needs. We recognize that particularly racial equity needs to be centered and integrated through all of this work. Next slide. And why racial equity? We are focused on racial equity specifically because we recognize we will not meet our state's goal of 70% if we don't focus on supporting students of color and those that have been historically marginalized. This slide shows that gap in attainment rates. And so as you're in conversation today, please hold this information with you as we engage. Next slide. And lastly, we are all living in the middle of a pandemic. And so in particular, as we engage in this conversation today, not only are we centering racial equity, but we're acknowledging that COVID-19 has had a significant impact on our post-secondary students, academically, financially, and that this has jeopardized students' access to basic needs. This all existed before COVID-19, but we are seeing the exacerbation of racial disparities and recognizing our students of color, again, are facing a disproportionate impact as a result of COVID-19. So this is just a framing for the conversation today to think about, again, how are we supporting our students and reaching a post-secondary credential? What is going on for our post-secondary students right now in terms of racial inequities, in terms of access to basic needs, in terms of COVID-19? This all comes together for the conversation today, in which increasingly we're recognizing if students don't have access to food, housing, childcare, mental health care, it will have an impact on whether or not they can reach a credential. So I'm going to hand it off to Savannah. We have a quick engagement for you before we turn it over to our panelists.
Hello, everyone.
And before we continue with Savannah, I think we're going to take a moment to quickly describe some progress that we've had recently, because while we've had the current crises that really brought the basic needs struggles to light, We really want to recognize that in the past year and a half, we've seen some progress in colleges and communities and as a state. So I just want to mention 3 areas among many others that have happened. So first, thanks to the advocacy and leadership of several who are here today, 2019 legislation is really making a difference. So HB 1893, sponsored by Rep. Entenman, funds student emergency assistance pilots in multiple community and technical colleges, and it also enacts partnerships between DSHS, State Board for Community Technical Colleges, and WASAC to find ways to increase student access to basic food benefits. And that's really been a challenge on the federal policy level, but we're working together on the state level for increased access. Also, the Senate Bill 5800, sponsored by Senator Randall, funds pilots in 6 colleges and universities supporting students experiencing homelessness. And those colleges are both creating systems changes and directly providing supports to students. So second, we're learning more about the prevalence of unmet basic needs, which is critical to being able to understand and advocate for students' needs. In fall 2019, 29 colleges participated in the Hope Center's assessment, which gave the first statewide look at the prevalence of unmet basic needs in Washington, as well as the greater impacts on students of color and other marginalized identities and circumstances. Third, I want to mention that we're increasing awareness and sharing effective partnerships and strategies through our new statewide learning community on supporting students experiencing homelessness. We hope that you can join us on our 4th webinar next month on wraparound service models. I know that many of you are working in your institutions and communities to make changes to support students, and in our breakout groups later this morning, I hope that you will be sharing some of the wins in progress that you've seen locally, regionally, and statewide. So now we're going to pass it to Savannah for some interaction. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy, for keeping us on track. So if everyone, this is time for us to hear from you and get your input as we shape the conversation that the conversations to come. So if you can go ahead and join us either by web or through text for our live poll. We will have 3 questions, and you could text in either 1 word or a couple word responses to the questions, and they will populate and show here on the screen. So the first question is, what is the greatest barrier you see to ensuring that students have access to basic needs? And if you have any technical issues, please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we will help you as we go. Thank you for highlighting transportation. That is an additional thing to consider as we have these conversations. Awesome. These are great responses. We're going to go ahead and move to the second question. The second question is, how have current crises impacted students' access to supports for basic needs? This particular question is specifically about access. Isolation is a huge one right now and something that we're all working with. Thank you for bringing that up. And the recognition that most students are not 19 years old and that we do have a different demographic that also need resources. Thank you for that one. Awesome, thank you. These are great responses. I'm going to go ahead and switch to the last question. Using an anti-racist lens, what do we need to do differently to ensure basic needs for students of color? Hiring more staff of color, focus programming that is culturally relevant and appropriate. Thank you. These are great responses. Highlighting the difference between equity and equal. Yes, elevating the voices of staff and people of color. Working with other organizations that they trust. Thank you. This is all about partnership building and building those relationships. That's a great one. All right, we are a little over time. We're getting a lot of great responses. Thank you for your input. And we will go ahead and move on to the next slide. And we will definitely be reading through all of these and making sure that we are aware of all of these things as we move forward.
Okay, thank you so much, Savannah, and thank you everyone for participating. Sorry, Amy, I jumped the gun there. I was so excited about the live poll that I forgot we needed to acknowledge all of the hard work. So we are really honored to have some key legislative leaders and national leaders in this space to join the conversation. I'm going to do a quick round of introductions for our panelists. I will start with a question for each, a question for all, and then we will open it up for you all to ask our panelists questions. So Savannah, if you can go to the next slide really quickly as I introduce the panelists. We have State Senator Emily Randall of the 26th District, who's elected into the Senate in 2018. She is the chair of the Senate Higher Education and Workforce Development Committee and vice chair of the Senate Health and Long-Term Care Committee. She's the first in her family to attend a four-year college and is dedicated to using her position to prioritize affordable college tuition, apprenticeship, and job training programs to prepare students for living wage jobs at local businesses. We have State Representative Deborah Entenman from the 47th District, a former non-traditional student herself who is passionate about education for people of all ages and stages of life. She was an inaugural member of the Seattle King County Head Start program, where she began her love of education. And she was appointed to the Board of Trustees at Renton Technical College in 2015. We also have State Senator Claire Wilson, who's built on her background of 25 years at the Puget Sound Educational Services District. as an administrator in early education and family involvement. Prior to that, teaching in Mount Tahoma High School, and was elected into the state Senate in 2018 in the 30th district. Senator Wilson is Assistant Majority Whip and Vice Chair of the Senate Early Learning and K-12 Education Committee. She sponsored numerous bills to address expanding access to childcare and improving academic success. And then we also have Bryce McKibben, who serves as a Senior Policy Advisor on Higher Education for U.S. Senator Patty Murray. Senator Patty Murray is the ranking member of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, and focusing that work on issues such as federal student aid eligibility, college affordability initiatives, campus-based aid, consumer protection, and all aspects of higher education regulations. So we are thrilled to have this stacked panel with us today. And I'm gonna start us off with State Senator Emily Randall. Senator Randall, you have demonstrated such tremendous leadership in accessing post-secondary education. Thank you for your support in getting 2158 passed to increase the Washington College grant, and your leadership on addressing housing for our post-secondary students. I know you've spoken to this from your personal standpoint. As we recognize the impact that COVID-19 has had on our students and the entire post-secondary system writ large, can you just share a little bit about what's on your mind and what you're thinking about in terms of post-secondary students, and particularly knowing that housing is a real issue for our students?
Thanks so much, Heather, for inviting me, and for everyone for tuning in and participating in this conversation today. I know for those of us who think a lot about students and think a lot about affordability and access and barriers, this pandemic period has only exacerbated all of the challenges that we already knew existed for folks in our communities who are just trying to learn and build better lives for themselves and their neighbors and their loved ones. You know, as you know, I am the first in my family to go to college or to graduate with a 4-year degree, and I also am, for at least, I don't know, a few more days, one of the 3 members of the Senate Renters Caucus, having been a longtime renter and having moved, I think we calculated, my partner and I, in our, the last 10 years of our lives together, 14 moves amongst us. And we know that so many folks in our community who are not homeowners, who struggle with housing affordability, have similar stories of having to move to whatever place is more affordable, to live in apartments that, with bad landlords who don't create, welcoming homes for them and safe and healthy places to live, and folks who even, are dependent on a car or a couch, or are living on the streets. And these folks are also doing everything that they can to survive and thrive. And our students who are struggling with being unhoused and housing insecurity are often sitting in the parking lots of our institutions right now, trying to get their homework done with the Wi-Fi that has been created as a hotspot in the parking lot. But if you don't have a car, if you don't have a reliable device, there are so many challenges, right, that exist for folks who are trying to get their degrees and achieve their dreams. And these have been challenges that my colleagues and I are here today, and all of you on this call have been working to remediate even before the pandemic, and now we know that the work is even harder, more pressing, and more important. One of the first bills that I had the chance to work on was, as you heard, Senate Bill 5800, and I worked on that policy because a formerly unhoused student approached me with a solution. They wanted to know, Charles Atkins wanted to know more about the demographics of students and how many students at institutions were experiencing housing insecurity and food insecurity. And they wanted to try some innovative solutions at a few institutions to figure out how to solve those problems. And you know, those are the best bills to work on, bills that come from folks who have experienced the challenges, who have ideas. We say over and over, especially in, you know, our justice system, that those who are closest to the problems are also closest to the solutions, but usually farthest from the power or the resources to fix them. And I see my job as a legislator, and I know my colleagues, you know, Representative Entenmann and Senator Wilson also see our jobs as bringing the power to the people, you know, ensuring that folks have access to the resources that they need to solve the problems that are impacting them and their neighbors. So, you know, we don't have the results of 5800 yet. It's still in the implementation process. We're still collecting data and analyzing the impact. And, you know, the pandemic has thrown a wrench in the gears, and you know, folks are not on campus as regularly. We still need to do some learning about how we can meet people where they are and provide them the resources that they need. But that will continue to be, you know, top of my mind, is figuring out how to get those resources to folks. And that first quiz that we had, the survey response I gave, was one of the big challenges that exists for us is funding. And that challenge has not gotten any smaller in this budget cycle as we go into, you know, next session. We know we're at a budget deficit. We know we are facing challenges, but we also know, even those of us who were not in the legislature following the last recession, that responding to an economic crisis with an austerity budget, with cuts, is not the solution that is going to help us recover faster. It's not the solution that's going to help students who are experiencing housing insecurity, who are trying to figure out how to keep the next meal on their table, who are looking for a job because they got laid off and they want something more reliable to be able to support themselves and their family. We know none of that will be accomplished if we don't not only maintain, but strengthen our safety net. And Senators Wilson and Representative Entenmann have been such champions on that work to provide childcare support, to provide, you know, housing and basic need and food assistance to folks, and also championing progressive revenue, which we know is the only way we're going to strengthen that safety net, not just maintain it. We need to make sure that it's not just the hardest working Washingtonians who are paying the highest percentage of their income in taxes. We want to make sure that we are flipping our regressive tax code so that the Washingtonians that continue to make money on this crisis, of which we know there are a few in our state, are contributing to our economy more equitably, so that the richest among us are supporting our economy in a way that all of us can benefit from. So that's what's on my mind. I also do some work in healthcare policy, which we know is essential to allowing folks to continue to learn safely. And I'm happy to be here with you today.
Thank you so much, Senator Randall. I want to get through the panel so we have time for questions. So thank you for those comments and again, your insightful leadership on this work. I'm going to move over to Representative Entenmann. Again, you also have demonstrated such tremendous leadership on this work with your bill on 1893 to address the intersection between public benefits and food and post-secondary students. And so again, thank you so much for your work on this, and tell us what's on your mind. Tell us what you're seeing going forward, recognizing again the impact of COVID-19, and what can we do to make sure students aren't further stigmatized, that, you know, these resources are proactively available and we're not making students, you know, have to go through more hoops to access food and resources.
Well, first I want to say thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion. I think it's important. I want to say it's nice to see my colleagues who I haven't seen in a while. I miss you. I also, you know, there are so many things that we are facing with COVID, and I believe that COVID is just really illustrating where our shortfalls are. First of all, we have asked students to learn online, and we have not provided them any online benefit. We don't know if they have broadband. We don't know if they have a computer. We don't know what their learning styles are and if online learning just is not going to work for them. That's number one. Number two, when people get sick, what are we offering them any services for if they're ill? I mean, if I think about a student who may be on a four-year college campus, I know at the University of Washington, there was Hall Health. What are we doing for our students who are ill? And then we have to think about some of our students are adults, they have children, they're trying to learn online, their children are trying to learn online. What is their broadband access even like if they have it? We have an educational system that was set up for white middle-class people who decided that when you finish high school, you go to college. But the reality is that is not who our society is. That is not who our higher education learners are. And we need to have a fundamental shift in the paradigm of how we provide higher education. I know with the Washington Student Achievement Council, we have a bias in how we count completion. We say completion is an attainment of a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree. And I beg to differ. I would say completion is a person who starts in adult basic ed and finally gets a high school diploma. I would say completion is a person who has some skills and goes back to get a certificate in the Windows Office suite so that they can improve their livelihood and make more money in the workforce if that's what they want to do. So I think we have to do a number of things. But first, we have to acknowledge that the system that we have is not a system that works for the majority of people today. We have to acknowledge that. And then we have to work to change that system. We cannot continue to perpetuate and to finance a system that doesn't work for most of the students that we would like to serve. And that is a very difficult thing for people to hear. I am on the board of trustees for Written Technical College. Many of the pieces of legislation that I have proposed have come out of talking to students and staff and faculty at the college where they are telling us about challenges that their students are having. Many of the bills that I have proposed because I was a non-traditional student and the system in the community college was not set up for me. I was successful, but the system just was not set up for me. And so I kept on thinking, and I continue to think about what would I want? What do I think students want? And I continue to ask students. It is really amazing that when I walk around campus before COVID, and I would just say, hey, my name is Deborah. I'm on the board of trustees for this college. And they would be shocked to find that out because nobody knows who the trustees are. And then I would say, what would you change about such and such? And they talk about all the things that they'd like to change. And so many of the, just asking students and trusting them to understand what their needs are, how to vocalize them, can really make a difference in how we set up and what we do. In the legislature, I know that right now, I am concerned about the proposed cuts to wraparound services because there are people in the legislature who don't even know what wraparound services are. Or they think that students don't need them and that we're just coddling students. I've heard that as well. But I know that all of those wraparound services I benefit from at one time or another. And we definitely want to protect those things from cuts. So as we move forward, we just have to say, we have to acknowledge that our system isn't working. We can see the breakdown in our system due to COVID, and we have to move forward knowing that we need to make significant changes in our system.
Thank you. Wow, that was great. I really appreciate you acknowledging and naming that. Okay, I'm gonna go to Senator Claire Wilson. Thank you again for your leadership, particularly on childcare. We know that as Rep. Entman was just speaking, our college student demographic is changing. About half of students at a CTC are working and almost a quarter report having at least one or more children. That's just within our CTC school, but we know the demographic of students between our 4 years and our 2 years is changing. So what's on your mind as we think about access to childcare to support people that are trying to get ahead, people that are trying to get a college credential in some shape or form, not necessarily just a 4-year degree. How do we support them in being able to work, watch their kids, and get a college degree? Oh, Senator Wilson, we're having some audio issues, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm taking off my earbuds. I'm not sure what's going on. So, hopefully my dog won't bark. That's what I'll just say right now. You know, the first thing I have to say is thanks so much for having me. And next year I hope my name's on your slide with actual big piece of legislation that's going to support what I'm talking about. You know, and really 45 years I've been working on this, which is a really sad thing. From the outside, and so for me being on the inside now, it's time not to convince me, but just let's move forward and do what we need to do to meet the needs of families across our state. And I guess what I would say first and foremost that's been on my mind is that we're about the only place in the world where you have to do the wrong thing to get what you need to do it right. And if we had, if we were in an equitable system from the very beginning, that was not based in what we know is racism and institutional systems that have disenfranchised and kept people out for in history forever, we wouldn't be where we are today. And so resource is incredibly important when we think about this. And then the other thing for me is we have institutions of government and institutions of education. Then we have this thing called early care and education and child care. And it's not an institution. It's all of these informal systems across our state. Basically, that is an industry that have been run by women and in communities, usually low-income communities and very much in communities of color. And so it's really important that, again, as we look at an equity lens, that we are thinking about how we're serving families. And the biggest issues for me, and you heard many of them today, number one, we didn't have access before. We had childcare deserts, and they get exacerbated because of COVID. And we had the industry basically almost fold itself because essential workers, although they were, never had gotten a living wage to actually be able to care for the children we're putting in their, you know, in their care. We also have to think about infants and toddlers, birth all the way through now. So we have to think about how we're caring for children, and where families have to work. And you should not be limited also to what you're doing based on what's available to you. So, for example, Working Connections Childcare. The hope was you would have access to Working Connections childcare regardless of what track you chose, what degree you chose, what area of learning you chose, whether it was CTC, whether it was 2-year, 4-year, apprenticeship, certification. And the first thing that happens is when it gets to the budget, whoa, it's like this is only what we can afford. So Senator Randall talked about revenue, and in this space, it is critically important that we are able to support all families, and we need to do that wherever they are. And as you think about being a student yourself, and if you have school-age children, school was there for children. And now with distance learning, there is not that care as there was before. So you are not only a student yourself, you are also trying to teach your children. And as we talk about connectivity, we talk about all those things. My question continues, Where are the children? Child care, family, friends, and neighbors, grandma, grandpa, they're in family homes, all those places, we need to make sure that anyone who needs support has support. And that's what I've been trying to do, and that's what I will continue to do, because we should not limit anyone to what they aspire to be because of what they don't have access to. And that just is my, my core. This is an economic recovery issue. It's not a poverty issue. It is everyone needs support, but we also need to look at who's furthest from that, and we need to make sure that we close the gaps we knew were there before we put dollars in areas and provide support to folks who may have resources, but given the current circumstance, might have access to less. My goal is to fill gaps, and it doesn't matter where you are, it's critically important.
Thank you. Senator Wilson, your sound was going in and out a little bit more, so just when we get to questions, I don't know if there's sounded just a little muffled, but I think we were able to get a lot of what you were saying, and especially as we go into this, restrictions and facing the budget crisis. So we will come back to that here in a minute. I want to get to our federal and our national perspective. Bryce, we're really excited to have you. I think in our first meeting over a year ago, there was a lot of interest in discussing and acknowledging all of the federal restrictions that prevent our post-secondary students from being able to access food, from being able to, work and learn at the same time. So can you speak? I know you are in the heat of it nationally as we approach our election, but would really love to hear from you around what is Senator Hetty Murray doing at a national level to support our post-secondary students?
Sure, thank you, Heather. And first, let me just say what an honor it is to be able to share the virtual stage here with our elected officials who are leading the way back home in Washington. I'm out in DC and missing the Pacific Northwest quite dearly, hoping to get back a little bit later this fall. I am very, very proud to be able to carry on the work that Senator Murray and to advance the work that she has tasked us all with doing around basic needs in higher education. This has been a top priority for her in the multiple hats that she wears at the federal level. So I will touch on food security in particular, but just for those who need just a bit of a refresher, she has this sort of incredible meeting of two very important levers that she's thinking a lot about how she's going to use next year, hopefully when political conditions look a little bit better for potential change at the federal level. She is not only the top Democrat on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, where we get to see the intersection of higher education policies under the Higher Education Act, but also the top Democratic appropriator on the Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education Appropriations Committee. So she's one of the few people who in Congress gets to figure out where the policy and the funding meet, and to do that in a coordinated way. And so she has set us out on a pretty direct mission over the last couple of years to figure out how we can use those levers and how we can design policy for the future around food security, around housing for college students, around childcare, mental health, and access to health insurance benefits, among many other basic needs that are confronting students. So on food security, this is an area where it's a little outside of her traditional jurisdiction because the SNAP program falls under the jurisdiction of the Senate Agriculture Committee. But the recognition that the work hour requirements, the 20-hour work hour requirements, and the set of very confusing exceptions to SNAP is growing tremendously within the Senate. We worked on several bills with other members like Senator Warren to eliminate those barriers. And while the legislation hasn't moved forward, I think we are in a position where when the next farm bill is reauthorized, which I believe is scheduled to happen in 2023, we will have more consensus about how to expand benefits for students in higher education to SNAP. I wish we didn't have to wait that long, but that because the bill was just reauthorized just 2 years ago, it's sort of on that timeline. Now, maybe there is a chance to repeal some of those restrictions in some other package, but that's really sort of outside of my area of expertise. What I can say is that there's just widespread recognition, and I think thanks to the work of institutions and you all at the working directly with students and communities to inform policymakers what this restriction means or what the various SNAP restrictions mean for students and how they create difficulty has really expanded the knowledge base of policymakers in DC about why we need to remove those restrictions. So I feel a good sense of momentum, and I think we just need to keep building on it. Though I want to touch on when it comes to other ways we can address basic need challenges at the federal level. Up until the pandemic hit in February and March, we were working on reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. And that is the foundational law that governs all federal student aid spending, Pell Grants, student loans, work study, all of the federal aid programs. And we really need to rethink not only the eligibility restrictions that are devastating for low-income students and non-traditional students, like the number of semesters and enrollment intensity requirements that create a tremendous amount of confusion and hassle for them. We also need to think about how we braid them with these other basic needs benefits that exist, so that the process that students go through, from the FAFSA to an aid award letter from institution to the onboarding process, actually repeatedly flag the availability of these other benefits and promote data sharing between agencies at the state and federal level so that students know these benefits are available to them. The restrictions are clearly one part of this, but getting the information in the hands of students is also a critical piece of this. And that's where the HEA can really make a huge difference. So I hope that while that process is going to take a little while to reauthorize that bill, because we need to be focused on the pandemic and our recovery, that when we get to HEA sometime in the next year or so, I hope that we'll be able to make some real progress on data sharing and around making that process simpler for students and removing some of those barriers. And then lastly, on childcare, there are several ways that we can address and support childcare availability on campuses at the federal level to promote those resources. The biggest one is the Childcare Access Means Parents in School, or the C-Campus program. Senator Murray in 2018, due to the budget deal that we passed that year, secured a 233% increase to the C-Campus program. To the budget allocated to that, it was $15 million. It's now regularly more than 50 million, 50, every year. And a number of our institutions in Washington State have been able to get those childcare grants, the C-Campus grants. I hope that we're going to be able to continue to build on that and expand on that so that we can subsidize both on-campus childcare whenever it can be provided, or if it makes more sense to provide subsidies for those who are looking for off-campus, looking at off-campus providers. And so that's going to be a huge piece of her appropriations role that she's going to be focused on through the remainder of this year as we work on the fiscal year 2021 appropriations and into the next year. So there's a lot of different avenues that we can make a difference, whether it's reducing the barriers to SNAP in collaboration with our other colleagues, making sure the Higher Education Act reflects the students of today and removes the barriers that keep them from accessing benefits, promotes data sharing between them, and then directly subsidizing childcare from federal government. We have an opportunity next year to provide federal investments in all of these areas where the state cannot. I know all of you are going to be working as hard as you can to navigate what is just a unbelievably difficult budget scenario, and the state has the requirement that the budget be balanced. The federal government has the opportunity to come in and fill those gaps, and that's why state and local funding is as part of this rescue package that Congress needs to pass is so important, and specific education stabilization dollars. So we're going to get to work, and she is there. She's committed to doing that. Senator Marie is going to be championing the needs of students and basic needs throughout the remainder of this year, and hopefully on more favorable ground next year. So I hope you'll stay engaged, and I really look forward to the rest of the conversation today.
Great. Thank you, Bryce. So I want to make sure folks chat in your questions now. I'm going to ask one more question to our panelists, but please, if you have questions, put them in the chat so we can get to you, put them in the queue. My last question for all the panelists, Bryce, you just kind of mentioned this a little bit about the federal role in supporting states, but I think we've all talked about this budget crisis. We recognize it's going to be a very tough year. There will need to be cuts made. How can we, this group, how can we support not cutting the basic needs for our post-secondary students? I'm going to start with you, Senator Randall, if you don't mind. What would you say to this group as we prepare for the legislative session and this budget tough decisions? What can we do to advocate and ensure students' basic needs are not cut?
Really important question, Heather. And I would say talk to as many legislators as you can. Talk to your legislators, advocate for your friends who are in other districts to talk to theirs, and start now. I've also seen, I was talking to some, other higher ed advocates recently, some good op-eds that have popped up in newspapers around the state from college presidents and folks in the business community about the importance of our a strong higher education system and a strong safety net for a just recovery. And so use your voice in as many ways as possible. Something that's scary about the upcoming legislative session is that it's all remote and lobbyists don't know how they're going to reach legislators. But something awesome about the upcoming legislative session is that it's all remote and you can reach out to your legislators for a Zoom meeting much easier than you could, to try and find someone in a hallway and pull them aside, right? Now is a time when your voices are going to be so important and there are new ways for you to use them. So start now, speak loudly, speak often about the importance of the work, and looking forward to fighting alongside you.
Thank you. Rep. Entman, can you respond to how you're thinking about entering into these tough budget decisions?
Okay, I really want to be honest, but I'm going to be political. I'm going to enter into these tough budget decisions thinking about protecting the most vulnerable. I would say that what Senator Randall said, I will replicate and go, yes, you can request a Zoom meeting with your legislators. And I know that I'm going to prioritize students and families and my constituents as opposed to lobbyists, because that's what I always do anyway. And so I'm going to continue to do that. And you're going to have, I think, better opportunities to speak with us because we will be a captive audience. I think that what is important is advocacy. I think letters to the editor, not just op-eds, but letters to the editor in your local newspapers are good. I think reaching out to your chambers of commerce and small business and explaining to them why it's important to support your community and technical colleges and higher ed. Talk to people who you don't normally talk to. This is something that we will get in this circle and talk to all of our friends about, oh, how this is wrong. But sometimes we need to reach out and talk to people maybe on the other side of the aisle or who have a different perspective than you do. Talk to people in your different silos. So if you are a member of a faith community, or if you are a member of a soccer team, whatever it is. I know folks who love to play board games, and so they do things in trivia. And when you think about higher ed and you think about game theory, these board game designers also have a role to play in what higher ed looks like, right? So let's think outside of our silos and get everyone focused on making sure that higher ed is a priority for our state.
Great, thank you. Senator Wilson, do you have anything to add?
So when you're reaching out, one of the most important things, I mean, you have to talk about legislation, talk about your stories, and talk about your challenges, and talk about solutions, because the systems are such where we all have areas of expertise, and those individuals that may represent you may not know a lot about the system, or may think the system looks like it did when they
We're
had
having a hard time hearing you still a little bit.
This is terrible. I'm just going to hold this up to my face. That's terrible. Oh my gosh. Okay. So this is not an either or. It's an and both. And I've been around long enough. 2008, we did this before, and that's why we're in this position right now. And for years, we've fought higher ed against K-12, early learning against K-12, special ed against gen ed. We need perspective. How they need.
Yeah, you're cutting in and out still. It might be your Wi-Fi connection. I'm sorry.
You should turn off your video.
Is this
It actually might be the hardware, the actual headphone and microphone piece that she's using.
Senator Wilson, we can see a very cute picture, but still are having a hard time hearing from you.
I apologize. I don't know what else to do other than say, stories matter. Tell your stories. And you don't have to limit yourself to your own representatives and your own senators. You can talk to everyone and talk to anyone. And stories matter. That's all I'll say.
Thank you. We got that. Stories matter. Thank you so much. Yes. So, Savannah, do we have any questions from our audience? I haven't been able to check the chat.
We do. The first question is, students at the Evergreen State College advocated for SNAP/EBT use on college campuses, which had some success. Can you give us an update on legislation that supports food access on campuses?
Rep. Entman, do you want to take that one?
So what we have learned is that there has been some success, and I'm also going to ask Claire Wilson to speak on this as well. But we have not been able to have a pilot program that has been successful, or to get an exception to allow students who have an EBT card to use them on college campuses. What we have been encouraged to do is to have retailers near colleges apply to use EBT, but we know that that is not always a realistic scenario. We do have some success with, and I know I'm going to get it wrong. Claire, I'm going to ask you to help me. Is it BFED? That is now students have access to. So, but I would say that we are not giving up. I would still like to make sure that we encourage the college campuses to, college food pantries and our network of food distribution to work together so that we have nutritious food in our food pantries. So that's the work that I'm still continuing to do.
Great, thank you. Bryce, were you going to add something on there?
I just wanted to say, because the restrictions around using EBT on campus have been traced to the rules for SNAP at the federal level, and I know that the state and individual institutions have worked really hard to ask for waivers of those rules, but have been rebuffed by USDA and FNS, to not give up hope. Because there's a lot of reasons why we might think differently about the response from USDA under a different administration. This administration has really had a intense hostility to all types of basic needs benefits. I know everyone on this group knows that. But I think that as we've looked at the responses we've gotten from FNS, a lot of the denials of different waiver requests are often traced to a political hostility to the programs rather than an inflexibility of the statute. So I think we have a lot of prospects, should there be a change this fall, that we might be in a different scenario next year. And Senator Murray, of course, will be fighting alongside you to put pressure on USDA to be more creative in the way that they grant these waivers and to understand why it is so critical for students.
Great, thank you. And I know the second half of our meeting, we will be breaking out by issue area. And I know that Claire Lane, I see you nodding your head emphatically. I'm hoping that you're in the food group so that we can have a more robust discussion on this. So Savannah, do we have any other questions? I just want to make sure we get to any other questions. And Senator Randall, I see you have to leave. Thank you so much again for joining us. We really appreciate you contributing to the conversation.
It doesn't look like we have any more questions in the chat, but I'm sure there will be more in the discussions that we have in the breakout room.
Yes, great. So with that, I know we are a little early. Amy, I'm going to turn to you to see, do you want to offer any last question to the panel, or do you want us to go to our break here? Amy, you're muted if you're trying to talk.
I thought that there was one more question from the group that we may have missed, but I did want to just give an opportunity to address, we've seen in the chat some comments about basic food education and training. And I just wanted to give an opportunity for Babs Roberts from DSHS or Erin Fraser from State Board for Community and Technical Colleges if they wanted to take a moment to speak. There have been some information in the chat. So would either of you like to take a moment and kind of mention that?
This is Erin. I was looking to see if somebody else was going to jump in. Always happy to jump in. Very excited about the approval of our expanded options for basic food employment and training. And so this really allows students in our system to take advantage of any career pathway that they choose and ensure that we're able to connect these students to the SNAP assistance that they're eligible for. So we're very excited to do this expansion. There's a lot of work, a lot of awareness that we're going to need to create. And I would say adding this to the ABOD navigation program that we've implemented over the last year, this will also strengthen our ability to bring awareness to SNAP about SNAP for post-secondary students and help them with the application process. So putting those two new efforts together are greatly going to increase our ability to address post-secondary food insecurity. So we're very excited to start implementing this.
Erin, thanks so much for sharing that update. Babs with DSHS, just wanted to give you a chance if you wanted to add anything.
Hi, Amy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. I lost the Zoom connection, so I was having trouble unmuting myself. I think, Erin said it well. I think the legislation and from last session has helped us to move forward with some great collaboration to look more broadly at how we interpret the federal rules. And I think between DSHS and WASAC and the state board, we've come up with some great ways to interpret those rules as expansively as possible, looking at how work study is counted as in order to allow for eligibility for SNAP is a big piece. I think we're all disappointed at the federal decision around use of EBT cards on college campuses in retail establishments and specifically in cafeterias. And hopefully Bryce is correct and we can get a more favorable decision under a different administration. That would be really optimal. But I do want to highlight that we are working closely with retailers on campuses to see if we can provide the technical assistance that would make it easier for them to apply and allow for that usage. And there's just a lot of great collaboration happening, and I look forward to the breakout session on food security where we could get into some detail around those.
Thanks so much, Babs. I know that we now have Senator Wilson with a little better audio, and I'm wondering if we could return to your comments about addressing childcare for post-secondary students. You had some really important points, and I feel like we might have a better chance at hearing them clearly. Let's take a moment for that.
I'll give it a try. How am I sounding? Okay. I have no idea what's going on, but I apologize. So this is what we're talking about, right? When we're talking about access. So we need it for everyone. I'm just going to say that what I started by saying is next year, I hope my name's up there with a piece of legislation that says you have your childcare needs met as students who are done perhaps with high school, but clearly not done with the journey that you're on. And right now we've been limited because really there is no funding for childcare. And there's a couple of things is the more we can work together with the federal government on this, the more dollars we have available in our state to do this. And right now with CARES money, we've been able to support families during the pandemic, but this was an issue prior to the pandemic, and this is only exacerbated. So have been working very hard as we move forward to make sure that we look at higher ed students as individuals who are on a pathway to economic success, and this is economic recovery and this is support. And that wherever you are and whatever pathway you're on, 2-year, 4-year, CTE, certificate, apprenticeship, whatever, that we're supporting families and in order to be self-sufficient and limiting the degree you get or the area of study in order to be eligible for care is unconscionable. It's unconscionable. And when you put a piece of legislation in, oftentimes your limit is what one says, this is what this will buy. So we are having conversations around care as well as revenue to pay for that, because this is an industry that was a desert before, and the pandemic has made it even a greater one. And the only other thing I would add is that we've focused a lot, and we need to continue to focus on birth to 5. But also what we know now with the pandemic is the school-age children We need to support families with that as well, because school was the care setting. And now when children are not in school, you have multiple roles that you're playing, and it's not okay. And then when you add special needs, or you add those other supports that families need, and nothing is there and everything is on a computer screen, it makes it even more difficult. So the whole world I'm working on is care for children and support for families in the context of the community and with parent choice. Where do you feel that your child's spirit is safest, and in whose care? And then how do we support that in order for you to be able to move forward, again, to be economically independent and successful and able to help your children and your communities thrive?
Great. Thank you so much, Senator Wilson. We heard you pretty loud and pretty clear that time, so I'm glad we were able to get your audio going. So appreciate you kind of redoing that a little bit and offering more insights. Thank you. And Maddie, I saw your comment in the chat that childcare, one of the biggest barriers to helping our students complete programs, and needs to be flexible to fit with student study and work hours. Very true. And I wanted to kind of pivot back to Bryce for one question, and then maybe wrap up with one more question, unless we have any other questions from the audience. Bryce, I know as we see recent unemployment numbers skyrocket, how can we connect post-secondary and those recently unemployed folks and thinking about those transitions? Can you offer insight on that?
Yeah, I sure can. You know, I think we all understand that this really, that meeting students' basic needs really comes down to getting the financial support that they need in their hands. And if we don't have the FAFSA process that works, the FAFSA and WASFA process that works for students and their parents if they're a dependent, then they're not going to get those funds in their hands. And right now, given the unemployment, we are at levels with about 30 million people currently receiving unemployment, and far more who've you know, had some period of unemployment this year during the pandemic. We're at an all-time high level of mismatch between the financial aid information that was submitted on the students' FAFSA, or which they are potentially filling out as we speak because it went online 2 weeks ago for the next academic year. A record level of mismatch between the income information they're submitting and what is actually happening to them right now on the ground. So I wanted to flag that students and families do have the option to appeal. The financial aid administrators at each campus can do what is called a professional judgment and take into account unemployment insurance, and to essentially zero out income and give students access to maximum Pell Grants. That also then makes them eligible for the maximum Washington College Grant and any state and other institutional aid that might be offered by the college. But the big thing there is to leverage getting maximum Pell Grants in the hands of students who might be eligible for it. You know, I've talked a lot with all sorts of folks in Washington State about how we need to improve our FAFSA and WASFA completion rates. And I know that WASAC has done incredible work here and is really sort of getting the word out. It takes a long time to, you know, sort of move or redirect the Titanic here, but as of the last cycle, you know, we were still 49th out of 50 states and DC in FAFSA completion nationwide. And that means that there's more than half of our high school seniors are going on without having completed the form and potentially leaving just untold millions of dollars on the table. So I think, you know, Senator Murray is really interested in working together, not only to improve those take-up rates, but then for the people who have made it through that gauntlet of an overly complicated form, to actually be able to appeal and provide their current information. And that's going to take a commitment from the institutions and community partners to let folks know about that option, that they can, that maybe their income that they submitted in 2019 isn't reflective of the hardship that everyone is experiencing right now, and that they could get more financial aid.
Thank you, Bryce. Really great connection. And WASAC does have a lot of resources up on our website for folks trying to understand financial aid application process, both the FAFSA and the WASFA for undocumented folks. I know there's a lot of chat going on in the comments. Savannah or Amy, can you help me navigate? Is there any other questions popping up?
Heather, could I just add, somebody had mentioned transportation, and as I think, as we talk about, I sit on transportation committee, and as we think about, again, childcare, and when we think about schools, we also have to think about housing, and how are we thinking about this together so that we don't have childcare off in some neighborhood somewhere that's miles away from any transportation, whether it's light rail or whether it's bus, so that individuals can actually live, have kids cared for, and get to and from wherever their employ is or their school is. And that is another thing as we think about, you know, communities and creating communities in our economic development, and light rail, it's really important that we advocate for those kinds of things too, as we look about not only what we need for our children, but what we need to get to and from, and where we live in relationship to all of that. Just another something to think about and advocate for as you move forward.
Thank you, Senator Wilson. We do have one more question and some comments in the chat. The question is, in California, anyone with SNAP is eligible for childcare subsidies. They don't necessarily get the funds, but simply conferring that childcare eligibility helps with other kinds of eligibility for support, and it helps identify exactly which families need more help, generates a more clear waiting list. Does Washington do anything like that?
Well, my hope would be that any place someone enters the system, any on-ramp, one would, if it's for food or if it's for housing or if it's for education, that one would ask what other services or supports might be needed. My whole goal would be to have no wrong door, a single point of entree, where one would not need to know the program they're eligible for, but that one would merely enter anywhere and say, this is who I am and this is what I need. And based on who you are and the size of your family and your access to resource, you would then be provided a menu that would say, here are all the programs and supports that you are eligible for and that are available to you. And right now, you've got to know which door to go in. And so that's the system that I know I'm trying to create with legislation, and that we're trying to create, so that it isn't about who you know and where you live that gives you the access and the opportunity that every single person deserves. Babs, what does DSHS do when people make contact?
So that's a great question, Senator. And to respond specifically to the specific questions, SNAP eligibility does not in Washington State confer Working Connections childcare eligibility. In general, the income eligibility is somewhat aligned, and in fact, it's a little bit higher for Working Connections childcare than it is for SNAP. But SNAP does have some additional rules around work and or education components that also have to be met by the person who is applying, and they are separate, similar application processes. But Senator Wilson, what you're talking about is spoken to in both the governor's 10-year strategic plan for poverty reduction, as well as the legislative executive workforce poverty reduction 5-year strategic plan for poverty reduction. Strategy 6 in particular is focused on this idea of a continuum of care model. We're coming into one place, you get that full menu of services. And there is a 7-agency work group right now, has convened for 4 or 5 months now to really look at what that would look like and how would we manage that process, and to begin working specifically on that strategy, because we do recognize that people are confused, not only about what's potentially available to them, but how those pieces work together. If you apply for one sort of benefit or service, it can actually push you out of another one, and that seems ridiculous to all of us, right? And we heard very clearly from the steering committee that helped the governor's poverty reduction work group that it was really very difficult to navigate processes, and often felt very much like nobody really wanted them to be able to navigate those processes. So those barriers are there. And I think that I'm really excited about the momentum that that plan is getting, in particular, the work that these 7-8, Aaron Frazier's part of that lead as well. And I'm pretty excited about where that work can go.
That actually makes a great segue for our deeper conversations around each of these basic needs areas we're going to focus on in part 2 of our meeting. I really appreciate all of the both specific knowledge from particular campuses and the kind of state view that you're all bringing to this, but I'd really like to thank our policymaker panel, Senator Claire Wilson, Representative Deborah Entenman, Senator Randall, who had to leave early, and Bryce McKibben, for joining us today to kind of give those federal and state perspectives on and advice on where we need to go as a state to move forward in strengthening wraparound services for basic needs. Thank you very much. Please stay if you're able for our more in-depth conversations for the second part of the meeting. For everyone, we're going to take a 5-minute break. That's going to give you a chance to do whatever you need to do to feel good for the second part of our meeting in 5 minutes, where we'll come back together. I'll describe our breakouts, and then we'll go into rooms based on what you indicated you were interested in your registration. So if you have any questions, us hosts will be here in the next 5 minutes, but otherwise feel free to put your, take your video off and take a little stretch break if you need it. And we'll see you in 5 minutes. Thank you, everyone. For anyone who's still listening, we'll start at 10:30 with our breakouts. So see you in 2 minutes. Okay, we'd like to welcome everyone back to our group. If you can join us with your video, that will be great. And if not, we know you'll be there with us. Thanks so much to our legislators and to Bryce, who were able to kind of help us springboard into our conversations in the second part of the meeting. For the next hour, we're going to have the chance for more in-depth discussions by basic needs topics. And in your breakout group, you'll be considering current issues impacting students. We've already begun to talk about that, and strengths of our current programs, but also challenges of supporting students and ways you want to see the state move forward. The facilitator in your group will guide your conversation with questions, but should not be constrained by those questions. So if your conversation needs to go in another direction, that's okay. So logistically, I have on the screen right now some meeting agreements, thanks to Savannah Navarro-Cresse actually bringing those to us from some of her student engagement work. So take a moment to take a look at those. Those are really intended to be increase our connection with each other and raising all voices around the table. Help out your facilitator if you can by having someone volunteer to capture main ideas and notes. And when you wrap up your discussion, we are going to ask you to complete a survey as well as take a break. And we're going to return to our full group at about 11:25 to share insights and consider next steps. So your discussion will go until 11:15. Your facilitator will give you a 10-minute break and ask you to complete a poll, and then we'll all come back together at, let's make it 11:30 to share insights and consider next steps as a full group. Savannah is now going to teleport us into our breakout rooms, and we'll see you back here in the main room at 11:30. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, I'm still working. I had to do these manually. Mark, you had mentioned that you wanted to go to childcare, correct?
Yep, thanks.
All right, I'll be going there shortly. Erica, which group would you like to join? Danny R. Which
Yeah,
group?
sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
I had signed up for food security.
Okay, I'll go ahead and put you in there now. Sorry, I had to do these manually, so that's what I've been doing in the background.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Huh. Erica, what group would you like to go to?
I don't know.
Okay, I'll go ahead and put you in childcare. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And Doreen? Danny? Which group should I put you in?
Hi, I'm sorry I got logged out of Zoom accidentally. I was in the housing insecurity, I believe.
Alrighty, we'll do that right now.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Doreen, I'm not sure what's happening. I don't have you on here. Sorry, you're on mute. I'm not able to hear you. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you in the waiting room and I'm going to put you back into the Zoom meeting and then we'll try again. Okay. One more time here. We'll just try again. It's not working. I've never had this happen. I'm sorry. Let's see what else I could try to figure out here. Give me 1 second here. I'm gonna work on figuring this out. There we go. Okay, I've been trying to figure this out, Doreen. I'm so sorry. I'm not sure what the issue is. And I also can't hear you. Uh-oh. Do you think you could log out of the meeting and then log back in? Okay, sorry about that. I think we got it. I put you in childcare, but I can move you. Can you put in the chat which group you'd like to be in? Awesome. I will get you into the food group.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
You can hear me.
Yay! It works, and I think you should be able to go to the food group, and I'm actually moderating that one or facilitating that one. So I will see you
Oh, good, I
shortly.
see it now.
Awesome.
Hello, everyone. This is Mustafa. I just got added to the call, so I was wondering if we were working on anything right now.
Hi, Mustafa. Thanks for that. We are actually in the middle of a break. We are all coming back from our respective breakout sessions. So we'll all come back together here shortly in the main room.
Hello, everyone. We have many people returning from their discussion groups. And in just a moment, Savannah, our Zoom guru, will be displaying one of our slides that'll kind of help us with our sharing from our key points. Yeah, perfect. All right, we are on the home stretch. We would like for one representative from each of our breakout groups, it can be the facilitator or it could be someone else, to share with us some of the insights or highlights from your discussion. And if you can, what are there thoughts on moving forward as a state about what needs to be done, particularly in your basic needs area that you discussed, but more broadly if you have that as well. And to kick us off, I would like for the housing security breakout to begin. And I'm delighted that Christina Pogostian will share some insights from our discussion group. So Christina, go ahead and unmute, and thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course. Hello, everyone. I'm Christina Pogostian. I am a student at UW-Tacoma, a transfer student from Tacoma Community College, and I'm also serving as the student regent for the University of Washington, which oversees all 3 campuses. We were talking about housing security for our students in Washington State, and some of the key ideas in our discussion included restructuring the model of housing for colleges. One of our members mentioned how housing is kind of set up as a for-profit business right now in a lot of university campuses. And to fix this, we could get more funding from the state and to consider housing as something that the campus is responsible for, something that's under the campus's responsibility for the students. Another thing that was mentioned was having a clear definition of what homelessness is and having a clear definition of what our goals are to solve housing insecurity for our students in Washington.
Great. Thank you, Christina. Anything else you wanted to add, or are we good?
That's all I had. Did you want to add more, Amy?
Nope, that's great. Anyone else in that group want to add anything? Okay, great. So we'll move on to the breakout discussion on food security. And I know Savannah was the facilitator. It could be Savannah or someone in that group could share some insights and highlights of your discussion.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share. So we talked about a lot of things. And one of the things that we talked about in terms of moving the state forward was the recent wins and being able to expand access for CTC students. And part of that also includes being able to share student stories and making sure that students are centered and able to really show that this expansion is necessary and connected to workforce outcomes. In addition to that, we also talked about what that could look like at the 4-year level. Specifically, we had folks talk about CTC students coming into the 4-year and looking for the same programs that they had available to them at the CTCs and not being able to have that continued support as they move forward in their degrees. We talked about how at the 4-year level there are some majors that really do align with the workforce outcomes, specifically nursing or other medical field majors. And we talked about how on the campus level, most campuses do have food pantries, and we talked about some of the specific things that they are doing to make sure that students have access to foods, things like using Uber Eats and Walmart grocery pickups, also gift cards and mobile food pantries and some of those different those different things, and then how we could how we can create access at those points to some of the benefits available to students, and making sure that they have access to all that's available to them. I don't have access to my notes right now because I'm sharing my screen, so if anyone else in our group would like to share, please feel free to do so. All right.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Savannah, for sharing. We'll move on now to mental behavioral health care for post-secondary students. And our facilitator was Heather Hudson. And tell us, either you or someone from your group, tell us a little bit about your highlights.
Yeah, so I told my group they can jump in at any time if I miss anything or get something wrong. We talked through some of the challenges that COVID-19 creating insecurity exacerbates mental health, that it is worse for students of color, our veterans, and foster youth experiencing already existing stresses and insecurities. There was a mention around Zoom fatigue, that many students who are in Zoom all day with their classes then maybe don't feel like going on to another Zoom call to talk about their mental health. Questions around how to access the resources if you're living on campus or off campus, when are things open? And then we talked about stigma, and that students often just don't feel safe. They don't know who to talk to about this. Some of the current efforts that mostly from our institutions spoke to a lot of emphasis on peer-to-peer mentoring and support. Conversations, some of our campuses are offering telehealth. Also an emphasis on establishing these safe spaces and applying trauma-informed approaches, and allowing for affinity groups to focus on you know, for example, allowing safe places for undocumented students and for students of color, BIPOC students to get together and talk amongst themselves. So thanks to Central and Gonzaga and WSU, also some shared best practices around certain resources or training. There was a mention of QPR, Campus Connect, and the JED Foundation. And you know, all of these curriculum training and even audits for understanding the faculty and staff understanding of work. The three things that the group pointed at to what can we do better, what do we need to do, faculty and staff training. That faculty and staff need to understand that mental health is tied to academic success, and that it is not something to be dealt with over there by those people. It needs to be understood and embedded within our faculty and staff broadly on the campus. There was also a direction to say, how do we make this proactive? Instead of always reacting and trying to fix the problem afterwards, how do we embed mental health supports and address this proactively so that there's not a need to then go back and justify or ask for more money? How do we make this something that is integrated with our campus environment and our atmosphere so that there is safe, trusted individuals beyond the clinical practitioners for students? I think that's it. Again, anybody in my group want to jump in, please do so.
Going to give a moment. I know that that was a particularly large group that was discussing mental behavioral health care. Anyone else want to add?
I should just mention, we also had a healthcare authority representative who talked a lot about the additional training and work that they've been providing to providers to allow for Zoom access. And so there was a lot of information and resources shared. And so Jennifer, I apologize, I can't remember all of the names of the resources that you mentioned, but I want to shout that out too.
That's great. Thank you so much. Let's turn now to child care access discussion, and Grace Sterling was the facilitator.
Yeah, we discussed childcare in two two areas, access and availability. In the access piece, we discussed the need for improved information flows to students of the available resources on campuses, the need to improve application processes, the challenges around administration of said applications, and then just affordability in general. Really discussed and dove deep into the alignment or the need to align programs, the program requirements, the application process in of itself. So for the Child Care Connections, BFET, SNAP, to help students navigate potential cliffs. Green River actually shared how they actually do this pretty well, and identify and address any policy barriers that counter that effort. So example, student learning hours don't count as working hours for one benefits program when they do for another. And we need to kind of really address those so that they're no longer barriers to students. And then for the availability piece, discuss deserts, limited facilities and slots on campuses, and the need to turn childcare into a business model where it currently is not. Also discussed campus considerations and looking at the opportunities to provide childcare on campus, that it's often a choice between operating a program in the red with the understanding that it's a critical need for students to be successful, or pursuing at least a revenue neutral model. But in doing so, it often means that less students are actually being served or have access to the available slots as they're often being provided to faculty members or people out in the community outside of the campus. So if anybody wanted to add more, please feel free to do so.
Give a moment if there's anyone else from the childcare group that wanted to jump in. Great. So we broke by topic area, but as we just heard, there were a lot of cross-topic issues that came up. And one of the things that came through strongly in our discussion was that there's an integration of the needs. And from UWT, they were talking about how, one issue may present in a case management situation, say housing, but there are multiple issues behind that. And often when we talk about legislation or an agenda for a policy change, we do it by topic. So I just wanted to open the floor a bit for what you heard about cross-topic priorities or integrated issues or legislative policy ideas that we need to be paying attention to in our state. And anyone can jump in. We have Senator Wilson.
I just would say that I can only speak for myself, but I'll just tell you the Senate's approach has been during this pandemic and during COVID to think about systems. So the systems for sustaining people, the systems for sustaining nonprofits and small business, the systems for sustaining revenue in the state. So rather than issue, we were really looking cross-committee, cross anything to say, what are all those things? I was in the system supporting people. So within that, we were thinking food, childcare, housing, workforce development, healthcare. So what are all those things that support and should sustain people during this time? And each chamber, House and Senate as well, have their different approaches. And so that's how the Senate has done it. And so all of the work you'll see moving forward has really come from those systems conversations that we've had during COVID, and especially those things that you'll see specifically that address the exacerbation of just what we know as we move forward in this coming session. So that has been, that has been our caucus approach, and I've been very appreciative of that because it is not just a single dimension view.
Thanks so much, Senator Wilson. I also see in the chat, Danny Trimble from Lower Columbia said, I think a big priority overall in addressing basic needs holistically is to simplify the processes for students and the administrative burden so we can focus more on student support. Those are those systems that Senator Wilson was bringing up. Another issue that we heard in our housing focused group was that often it's the whole cost of attendance issue around financial aid and all supports financially for students that aren't taken into consideration when we're lobbying or when we're advocating as a state. And so that financial aid issue we heard also from Bryce McKibben. Any conversations around the connections to how we do financial aid with all of these basic needs areas?
I'll go ahead and step in for the food security group. One of the things that we did talk about was in terms of access to food services that different campuses provide is transportation. Some of the campuses are really further out, and how we consider accessibility in connection to transportation is vital. And some of the communities where our schools are located don't have the infrastructure for public transit, and being able to get students to where the food is or getting food to the students can pose a barrier. Additionally, when we talked about some of these benefits being available to students at the 4-year level, we did talk about how if we can continue to have some of these supports available from CTC to 4-year, then that could help with completion and seeing more students of color with the ability to complete a 4-year degree, and from there being able to have representation when we need representation for people of color in mental health care, in staffing, and all of these different places where we need people of color so that we could have that piece. This was also mentioned when we had the question about anti-racist practices. So there is a lot of cross-topic priorities.
Thanks so much, Savannah. And I also noted that Bryce McKibben, in his comment, noted that we need to be focusing on proactive, so asking students what support they need for basic needs rather than just opt in or waiting for students to be able to find resources. So creating the system where it's proactively aware for students. Great. Any final closing comments before we wrap up?
Just want to bring our attention back to the issue of, by the way, this is Mustafa. I'm a student at UW as well. I just wanted to bring our attention back to the issues of racial equity in the system and our different campuses, making sure that whatever we do, be it housing security, food security, financial aid, mental health, we are able to target students of color, because right now we live in uncertain times, and we all have seen what is going on in the country with Black people and other folks of color. How can we make sure that the system is well navigated for students of color? They don't have like a lot of challenges and a lot of obstacles when they're trying to navigate the financial aid system, food, and all the other resources within higher education that is able to support these students. How can we make those processes easier so that they can easily access, and connecting them to the right people and the right channel that will support and listen to their needs and their stories?
Mustafa, thank you so much for that really critical point. All right. I think we could continue this conversation quite a bit longer, but because of time, I'm going to pass it to Heather, who will take us to our next steps. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Amy, and thanks everyone again for sharing out what great conversation. So thank you. The first thing is we just want to acknowledge that, you know, getting through each day or maybe each meeting these days feels like an accomplishment. I was in the mental health group, so in the vein of mental health, I hope everyone is able to take care of themselves, and we just want to acknowledge, yeah, it's a lot. We're all going through a lot, so thank you for showing up to the meeting today and contributing. And then second is, we hope this continues. We recognize that these issues existed before the pandemic, and these issues meaning both the racial inequities, the injustices for Black and other folks of color, as well as the access and the need for food, housing, childcare, and mental health for our post-secondary students and others. As we mentioned at the beginning, the Washington Student Achievement Council is here to convene. We are here to facilitate this conversation, and we will hope to continue that conversation. We think about this role as a key strategy to increasing post-secondary attainment for our students. We believe that if students do not have access to basic food, housing, childcare, and mental health care, they will not be able to get a credential, and that is why we are here. So we invite you and ask you to continue the conversation, continue engaging with us. Help us shape what is that aspirational vision? What should it look like for Washington State to make sure that post-secondary students, whether they're at a 2-year, at a 4-year, they're in an apprenticeship program, they're in a certificate program, what should it look like for us to support them so that they all have access, all students have access to these basic needs that we talked about today? That is our challenge, that is our invitation to you and our call to action. So please join us for the next advisory group meeting. We will save the date, May 20th, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Probably will be another Zoom meeting. We will be working to put together another agenda to share out, but please, you know, Savannah, share the next slide with our contact information, and so that if you have follow-up questions, feedback, more ideas about what you think we need to focus on for the next meeting, please don't hesitate to reach out. And again, thank you so much. We are here to work with you all and really want you all to help shape what this looks like. And we will be here to convene and facilitate that conversation as best we can. So with that, I think we will give you back maybe 6 minutes of your day to take a deep breath and do whatever it is that can help you take care of yourself and continue on with the work. So thanks again to our panelists, legislators for being here and leading this conversation, for your hard work, and everybody else that is working with our students. And to the students, keep going. Shout out to all the students that joined us today. We're here for you. So congratulations on just showing up and doing that work. Thank you, everyone.